Hey everybody, I thought I'd share a few thoughts with you all as we're living in such challenging times right now. I know this has just been so hard for everyone as all of our lives have been just totally flipped upside down and we're truly living in the midst of a modern day plague, right? As the coronavirus wreaks such havoc across our entire globe. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day though and he said something which I thought was pretty interesting. He mentioned that the plague is not the only awful disaster, calamity which we see so often in the Bible that we're actually experiencing today right now in our own lives. He pointed out that those of us who are faithful Christians, and especially committed Catholics, that we are also in the midst of a famine, a spiritual famine. And of course, a famine, as we know, is when our normal source of nourishment is hard to come by. It's not available, it's lacking. And in a famine, the weaker of people start to wither, and eventually they perish. And so I was thinking, what's the difference in a famine between those who perish and those who survive until the end, until the normal, robust means of nourishment is once again available? What's the difference between the two groups? Well, those who survive, though they don't have access to the best nourishment, which they would normally have, the ideal nourishment, they nonetheless scratch and claw for whatever they can get. Even if it's just a little bit, it nourishes them and they have just enough to make it. And all of this has kind of been on my mind as we begin Holy Week this upcoming Sunday. Of course, it's so disheartening that we're not able to celebrate the Mass and receive the Eucharist and celebrate Holy Week as we normally do. But what are some ways in which we might be able to nonetheless scratch and claw spiritually to survive this famine, especially the famine of the Eucharist? And of course, the number one thing is prayer. That's the most important thing always in our Christian life, to be faithful and to persevere in prayer. I recommend now, especially in these days, to try to pray with your family. Maybe that's something that you never do, right? That's like a whole new idea for you to pray with your family. Maybe propose, why don't we say an Our Father together before we go to bed? How about we pray before meals if we don't have a custom of doing that? It's a good thing, and we should all really do that. And now is the time to start. Interestingly, I read an article in the Washington Post not too long ago, just the other day, which commented that the vast majority of Americans, even Americans who don't readily or regularly admit to praying or even having a relationship with God, they admit recently to having prayed that the coronavirus would end. I thought that was really interesting, what God seems to be working in our lives and in our society in the midst of this disaster. Now, later in Holy Week, we come to Holy Thursday and Good Friday. So just a couple recommendations I had was that it might be a good occasion to read the passages, which we would normally hear at the Holy Thursday Mass and the Good Friday service. On Holy Thursday, we would normally hear 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23 through 26, which is when Jesus institutes the Eucharist. For the first time, he turns the wine and the bread into his body and blood with his apostles there at the Last Supper the night before he is to die. And then later on Holy Thursday, we read John 13, verses 1 through 15, when Jesus washes the apostles' feet. So a couple passages we might reflect upon and kind of pray over very slowly and read very seriously. On Good Friday, we normally hear John's Passion narrative, right? It's one of these days when we hear this super long gospel and it seems like it's taken forever. Well, it's actually just John chapter 18 and 19. So we might read those two chapters. It's not that long. I mean, it's kind of long, but it's not that difficult. We might read those two chapters on Good Friday. Maybe watching the services on TV if we're able to. Fasting, of course, on Good Friday is something that we're required to do. To not eat meat and not to eat between meals, to just have two small meals. Maybe don't eat at all if you're able to. And you could also think about continuing your fast into Holy Saturday in preparation for Jesus' resurrection on Sunday. Just a couple things you might think about doing, and you can come up with so many other ideas on your own. I encourage you to do that. Whatever it is, we really are called to scratch and claw, especially this year, to get the necessary nourishment. So I assure you, as we enter into Holy Week, of my prayers, and I ask for you to pray for me as well as each of us. We just are trying to get through this famine and this plague as best as we can. I wish you a blessed Holy Week, and I hope to see you soon.